everybody, Mark from Rams Up here. I have another Rams fan rap session. This is our fifth one. And today I have John Capotorto from New York. Did I say your name right?
Yes, you did. Actually, you don't have to edit that one.
Yeah, good, good. And so, John, you live in New York. Whereabouts in New York?
Well, hello, Mark. Great to meet you and finally see you. Right now I live in Manhattan, but I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. I was born and raised in Brooklyn and kind of worked my way here across the river to Manhattan. And now I live on the Upper East Side of Manhattan.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I've had I think two trips to New York City. My wife was originally from Long Island, out near in Westbury, near Roosevelt Fields, if you know where that is.
Yes.
So we made a couple of trips back there back in the day. And you've lived your whole life in New York then, more or less?
I lived more or less my whole life in New York. I had a little bit of a period of time where my family, who originally from Italy, moved back to Italy. So I lived in Italy for a while during the 80s. But overall, I'm a New Yorker.
Okay. What part of Italy? Just curious.
My parents are from down south, the Puglia region, the heel of the boot. But I spent a number of years in Bologna studying medicine. I'm a doctor, and I kept ties with Italy. I married an Italian woman, and we go to Italy every summer. But for a good period of time during the 80s, 6-7 years, I lived in Italy.
So I assume you speak a fluent Italian.
Yes. With a little bit of an American accent, but I do enjoy going there and being able to kind of fit right in.
Yeah, one of our good friends, our neighbor down the street, is Italian, and she speaks fluent. She goes back to Sicily every couple of years, and good stuff. So, how did you become a Rams fan growing up in generally the New York City area?
Well, I was thinking about it, especially as I was thinking about this conversation that we were going to have. And I remember distinctly, believe it or not, it was way back in 1969. And I actually remember my first Ram game that I watched on TV. And if you recall, Mark, in those days, there was the blackout, and you didn't get to see your local teams on a weekly basis. But the first game I actually saw that the Rams played, I remember one of my classmates in the fourth grade was talking about this team that he was following, and they were going to play the playoffs. They were going to play on Sunday against the Vikings, and it was the playoffs. It was 1969. And I remember watching that game. And of course, he was a Ram fan, and he was crazy about the Rams. I didn't know anything about football at that point, but I turned the game on. And when I started watching the game, it was the Rams and the Vikings, and they talked about the fearsome foursome, Deacon Jones, and of course, Roman Gabriel. And even though he was Filipino, but with a name like Roman, an Italian son of Italian immigrants. I mean, it meant something to me. And I rooted for them during the game. And believe it or not, if you go back and look, it was the 1969 divisional game between the Rams and the Vikings. The Rams were up 17-7 at halftime, and I thought we had it in the bag. And of course, again, in Minnesota, with the weather being below zero, the Rams ended up losing that game. But as I told my son later on, because he's as big of a Ram fan as I am, I said, your fandom really gets rooted when your team that you're following breaks your heart the first time. And after that, you just can't let it go. And even though they lost that game, I kind of follow them, especially during the 70s, where I hate to say it, they constantly always broke our hearts, Mark.
Right. And that's where I think talking about getting your heart broken, I think it happened 4 or 5 times in the 70s.
It was brutal.
Yeah. And there were times where, I don't know, there was at least the game you talked about. I think there were a couple other where weather had a big role in it. There was that mud bowl at the Coliseum against the
Again,
Vikings too, I think, right?
yes, the Vikings, that the Mud Bowl, where I remember that distinctly. We went into that game pretty confident. We were playing at home finally, playing at home against the Vikings, and I didn't. The weather finally was going to be on our side. Instead, it was a complete and total mess.
Right.
And you knew that whoever scored first and was going to win that game. And in fact, the Vikings immediately scored twice, and that was it. The rest of the game was just torture. Not being able to really compete. The weather has definitely, especially during the Rams during the 70s, they were probably the best regular season team around. I mean, I think for a while there, they had the record for the most consecutive divisional wins, championships. And they were constantly in the playoffs, and they were constantly losing and having our hearts broken. Well, a lot of it was because of the weather. I mean, it's not a mystery as to why the Vikings haven't made the Super Bowl ever since they moved out of Metropolitan Stadium and they played indoors. The weather helped them get to the Super Bowl, especially during the 70s, as often as they did. So, and unfortunately, it was at the Rams' expense. I remember when we went to Minnesota and we had Jamie Harris as our quarterback, and again, there too, the weather did us in, and we lost that as well. So, unfortunately, the Vikings have definitely broken our hearts. And my brother, who is a few years younger than I am, he grew up a Cowboy fan. So, you could imagine in our household, the two of us constantly bickering and trash talking. But, for a while there, he had the better end of the deal, being a Cowboy fan. But I stuck to my guns, and to this day, I'm a proud Rams fan.
Yeah, I could never really understand people, you get a lot of this, especially with Ram fans. Oh, I used to be a Rams fan. And I don't understand how that works. A lot of them blame the move to St. Louis. A lot of them blame Georgia Frontiere, various things like that. And I was like, I don't know, man. I'm all in from day one. And you talk about the 70s, man. If that decade of the 70s, you're right. They were, during the 1970s, them and the Steelers were probably the most consistently great teams. And the Rams just kept on falling short. And in a couple of those games go a different way, would have really changed the trajectory of how people feel about the Rams nationwide anyways. Starting to get that feeling now with McVay, and I think they're super respected. And you talk about the weather, and those teams were not flashy teams. They weren't like the greatest show on turf where you think, well, we get these guys outside and they're done. Those were pretty tough teams that ran the ball well and had really, really good defenses, and still just came up short in the NFC Championship game, I think 4 times, right? 4 times in the 70s. Crazy.
And we were able to do, Mark, something that we stopped doing, especially during the Greatest Show on Turf days, and even now with the McVay era. The Rams don't win ugly. Right, the Rams, the Rams back in the 70s would win ugly. We were able to win that 17-14, battle of the trenches where our defense carried the load. Ever since the Greatest Show on Turf, and then recently, when we win, if we play those kind of games, we don't win. I always feel that the Rams don't win ugly, and I hope now with the move towards a more physical team, in the trenches, of course, not having Aaron Donald there, I hope now we'll be able to win those games where our offense is not clicking and our defense can carry us to the promised land. But that used to be the case in the 70s. And And like I said, the 70s really made me a Ram fan. And of course, being a New York Ram fan, it didn't make a difference where they played, right? When they moved to St. Louis, and when Georgia took the Rams team to St. Louis, it didn't really make a difference to me. And I really cherished those years. In fact, I see you're wearing a St. Louis Rams hat.
Yeah, I gotta update my stuff here.
I have one of those myself. No, listen, I remember going to my very first Ram game in St. Louis. I had gone to a Ram game in New York when they came and played the Giants or the Jets. But the first game I ever went to, home game I ever went to, was in St. Louis. And I remember waiting online, and I had, a throwback LA Ram hat on at the time, the opposite of what you have on now. And I remember there was an LA Ram fan in line and turned to me. He goes, "Yeah, they're coming back to LA. It's only a matter of time." And I said, "You know what? I don't care. I don't care where they play. If they play on the moon, I'm still going to root for the Rams." But I also reminded him that because he was visiting St. Louis and was watching, decided to go and watch a Ram game. So I reminded him that the only Super Bowl we had at that moment was thanks to them being in St. Louis. So I said, as far as I'm concerned, greatest show on turf is the St. Louis Rams. It's not the LA Rams. And
yeah, it's an interesting situation. When the Rams moved to St. Louis, I had no connection to St. Louis. More or less a Dodger fan, so that I saw the Cardinals as kind of like the enemy. But when they went to St. Louis, I was all in, and I think a lot of Ram fans still were. I don't know if the reverse is true, and I understand, when the Rams, supposedly abandoned St. Louis. I know it must have been really painful, and I get it. But hopefully, there's still some Ram fans in St. Louis. And I'll tell you, we went to St. Louis once as well. We went to the Rams Panthers game, the game where they retired Isaac Bruce's jersey. And it was I took my son with me, and it was quite an experience. We had been to some Ram Charger games in San Diego, where there are still a lot of Ram fans, but we were, generally surrounded by Charger fans. And it was really cool. We stayed in a hotel, game day. We take the elevator downstairs, and the elevator doors open up, and the lobby is just full of people wearing Rams jerseys. And it was kind of a shock. We hadn't seen that. It's like, wow, this is really cool. So, you got to salute St. Louis for really getting behind the Rams. They really were St. Louis owned the Rams for the whole time they were there, embraced them. And it's kind of a shame that from their perspective, they came back. But for folks like me, it was a pretty big deal. For people like you, irrelevant, I guess.
And, listen, there's no doubt, being understanding the business of the sport, there's no doubt that, Stan Kroenke made the right decision, right? I mean, I think they came in second most valuable team in the league, and they were in the bottom of the league when they were in St. Louis. So there's no doubt from a financial point of view, it was the right move to make. Similar to when, the Dodgers left Brooklyn, right? Going to LA, and now they're probably one of the more valuable franchises in baseball. If they had stayed in Brooklyn, who knows where they would be right now? And with the Yankees and the Giants at the time, they probably wouldn't have gotten to where they are now in LA. So from a sports business point of view, it was definitely the right move to make. But it just so happens that my son met and then eventually married a girl from St. Louis. So while the Rams were in St. Louis, the few times that we would go and visit St. Louis and visit Lucy's family, I can't begin to tell you, Mark, how, like you said, how into the Rams they were. I mean, they was their team. And those 5 years, especially during the greatest show on turf, I mean, St. Louis really embraced them, and they were fun to watch. I mean, there was
Oh man.
I mean, even as good as the Rams have been under McVay and under his offense and everything that we've seen since 2017, I keep reminding my son, who unfortunately was too young to fully remember, especially the Kurt Warner 3 years that he was there, how much fun they were and how much they revolutionized the sport. I mean, the game that we see today is thanks to, obviously Vermeil, Mike Martz, and the Greatest Show on Turf. And it's thanks to what they put on TV that people wanted to watch, that, they went back and tinkered with all the rules to make it so that everyone now all of a sudden was playing the Greatest Show on Turf level of football.
Yeah, that was, I've talked about it so many times. That was a special era, those 2 or 3 years where they were at the top of their game. It was just incredible, especially given what we had just gone through in the years prior to that. And like I said the other day, I felt like every game I was like, this isn't gonna keep on going like this. They're gonna come back to earth at some point, and they really didn't. And a little story about that team, if I remember this correctly, I think my son was 9 years old, and we had a fantasy football draft that year, and we needed another team, and there were 3 boys there, 9, 10 years old, and we said, let's let them manage their own team. They'll manage a team as a group. It's like a big deal. We needed another team, so we let them do it, and they drafted Marshall Faulk and Kurt. I think they got Kurt Warner in like the 16th round or something. And they did pretty good that year.
Actually, the same. I was part of a fantasy league as well. At least a friend of mine was part of the fantasy league during that time, and they won, I think, 3 years in a row. They had Warner, Falk, and Bruce. That's all they needed. The rest of the team didn't matter.
You're right.
And it was a fun period. But getting back to the early days of my fandom, unfortunately for me, once they took the blackout rule out, then I was stuck watching either the Jets or the Giants here, and whatever the game of the week was. And thank God the Rams were good during the 70s, but obviously they weren't going to be on TV as often as they were prior to the blackout rule being lifted. And so I didn't see as many Ram games as possible. And I think you mentioned on one of your podcasts, I used to watch the highlights on the Saturday before the Sunday game for the subsequent highlights of the previous week. And so we would watch, it was like 2 minutes of highlights. Right. Where they would show you NFL tapes, of the game. And that was my exposure to the Rams. But it was still, I was still following them, still a Rams fan. Anybody asked me, of course, there were a couple of Italian Americans that kind of helped me continue to follow them at the time. You remember John Capoletti.
That's the first name that came to mind, yeah.
The whole Capoletti story and obviously watching the movie with his brother, that of course, watching Vince Ferragamo lead the Rams to the Super Bowl. And that's a player that will always be dear to my heart because Vince was good. He wasn't, when I was looking at his stats the other day, I was like, whoa. I always thought he was great, but he wasn't really as good as some of the quarterbacks today. But again, different game, different era.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the nature of the Rams, the personality of those Rams teams. Like we already talked about, yes. They were tough, physical teams. The quarterbacks were good. James Harris, Pat Hayden, Vince Ferragamo, but none of them were what you'd call top tier quarterbacks. But they were good.
Yeah, absolutely. And even Jamie Harris, I mean, I think he was, we had some really good years with Jamie Harris running the team. And again, you're right. I mean, the guys that I remember most that carried the team was, Lawrence McCutcheons of the world. And unfortunately, one of my biggest regrets was when Eric Dickerson was the running back for the Rams. I was in Italy, and I didn't get to see him while he was a Ram. I mean, I would follow him, via newspapers, American papers that were there. I remember USA Today came out during that period, and it was great because the Herald Tribune was another paper that would give you the scores, and you would read the box scores, and wow, this Eric Dickerson guy is really good. And then the Italian TV, cable TV, would occasionally show you some of the games. And during the last period, number of years that I was there, they would actually show the Super Bowl live, late at night, and you would watch it, till 2:00 in the morning. Unfortunately, the Rams didn't make the Super Bowl that period during the 80s, but at least you got some
Right.
news and what was going on. And then when I got back to the United States, it was the famous Flipper Anderson game, and I had my moment of glory here in New York when the Rams beat the Giants during that playoff run. The Flipper Anderson game is also a game that I won't forget, because, like I said, the next day I had a lot of trash talking ability with all of my buddies that were Giant fans. So good times as a Ram fan. Of course, we've had some bad.
Right.
And you got to go.
The Rams seem to follow the trajectory of a sine wave. They have these periods where they're really, really good, and then we go through this painful era, and then they come back and they're really good. Now this period, except for the 1 year with all the injuries, it's been pretty consistent. They've put a good product on the field. And for those of you younger fans, John mentioned John Capotorto and his brother. What he's referring to is John Capotorto won the Heisman Trophy at Penn State, and during his Heisman speech, his little brother had some physical disability of some sort. I don't remember what it was.
Mark, he had leukemia. He was fighting
leukemia. Okay, and so John gave his speech, and he dedicated it to his little brother. And I'm not going to try to do it justice here, but it's a pretty emotional moment. You can probably find that on YouTube somewhere. I think it holds up again the test of time, being pretty emotional viewing. And that was John Capotorto. Right after that, he was drafted by the Rams as a running back, and had not a great career, but he made a little bit of an impact in a few years with the Rams. Hey, I got to ask you. I also wanted to say, you talk about being able to follow the Rams. Over the years, I've had to go to some extreme measures to be able to see them. Even here in California, when they moved to St. Louis, we had to hit the local sports bars on occasion if we wanted to watch a game, and fight for the one TV in the corner that's you can watch the Rams over there. And then there was also a period where where I was living, if I wanted to pick up a preseason game, I had to do it on the radio, and I'd be out there in the garage setting up the old school rabbit ears, if you know what I mean,
Yes.
Splitting the antenna wires and taping them to the garage door so I could pick up this staticky feed from Bakersfield where they had the game on the radio for some reason. So I know what you're talking about. Over the years, it hasn't always been easy watching and listening to Ram games. I did want to ask you, how painful is it being surrounded by Jets and Giants fans? Is that a tough existence?
No, I think let's divide the two teams. Of the two New York teams, the team that I will maybe hope that they are successful are the Jets. Only because they're not directly competing against the Rams, although we're playing them this year. But I don't root against the Jets. I don't root against the Giants either. When they played the Patriots those 2 times during the Super Bowl. Of course, as a Ram fan, there's a particular dislike for the Patriots, but I rooted for the Giants as if the Rams were playing those Super Bowls. That's how much I dislike the Patriots, and that Super Bowl that the Rams lost against them, not this last one in 2018, but the one with the greatest show on turf loss to them, was, to this day, I still can't get over it. It was the most painful, one of my most painful sports moments. And I follow all the sports, and I've had my moments in all of the sports, but in football and being a Ram fan, that was a very painful day when they lost to the Patriots back in 2001, or it was in 2002. I think it was 2002. So, it's not that bad, Mark. And in fact, every time when they ask me, are you a Jet or a Giant fan? When I meet someone, I'll always tell them, no, I'm neither. And it's like, what fan are you? And then when I'll mention that I'm a Rams fan, they always want to know, how did you become a Ram fan? Why? And, it starts the conversation. I tell them about the fearsome foursome, Roman Gabriel, Jack Snow, and then, of course, the 70s, Hacksaw Reynolds, Merlin Olsen. And before you know it, they're talking to me about whatever memory they may have.
Yeah, I mentioned to a lot of fans that I talk to, and I tell them that the Rams are one of the, how do I phrase it? One of the iconic franchises in the league in every way except Super Bowl wins. And they're like, why do you say that? And then I start mentioning the things you mentioned. Well, you got the fearsome foursome, you got the greatest show on turf, you got Jack Youngblood and Fred Dryer, Jack Youngblood playing with a broken leg, and then you got the McVay era, you got 5 NFC championships in the 70s. And then they kind of look sideways and say, you know what, I guess you might be onto something there. They don't really appreciate it until
they're the team of firsts. They were the first team, like you mentioned. I've heard mentioned the first team to actually have the emblem on the helmet. The first team to have an prominent African American quarterback for a while there. The first team to draft an openly gay player. I mean, they're a team of firsts, and they're
first Mexican American player as well.
Filipino as well. With
right.
Roman Gabriel. So, they are definitely ahead of the curve. They've always been ahead of the curve. And even when, look, I know you mentioned Georgia, and I'll never forget when the Rams won the Super Bowl. To me, obviously, I'm a little biased here, but to this day is probably one of the greatest Super Bowls, that's been played. When they played the Titans, the way it ended and the way the whole game went. I mean, it was just so exciting. And when Georgia went up there, and I know you mentioned Georgia, and when Georgia went up there and said, I want to thank, the people of St. Louis, I said, holy cow, they've had the team for 5 years, and you're thanking, how about thanking me, Georgia? I've been a Ram fan since 1969.
Yeah, she probably didn't consider that, not only that, but she still had thousands of fans in LA and California. Yeah.
Yes. And when she said that, I remember I was kind of like, and I love Georgia. When she was on the sidelines, she always had the color scheme, of her clothes matched the Rams. I mean, Georgia was Georgia, right? But when she said that, I was like, that's it. I don't want to hear Georgia.
Yeah, I never really I didn't have this anger towards her like a lot of people did for whatever reason. I just, one of those things that's out of your control. Just move on. I'm a Rams fan, and leave it at that.
But they should never have left LA. And if St. Louis wanted a team, they would have gotten the Stallions, whatever it was that they were going to get. And the Rams should have stayed in LA. And of course, history would have been very different. But the butterfly effect, you never know, what was going to happen after that.
Yeah. And I don't want to, Andy, I have to go back and revisit this because it's a little bit it's so far long ago. But the Coliseum Commission had a lot to do with the Rams leaving, and a lot of people probably don't know what I'm talking about, and I barely know what I'm talking about. But there is a big squabble between the Rams and the Coliseum Commission, and that's what drove them to Anaheim,
Yes.
and then eventually to St. Louis. So I'm not going to get into that now. It's pretty boring stuff actually.
And again, for me, being out here, it didn't make a difference to me. I remember when they moved to Anaheim. Obviously, I didn't know how far Anaheim was from LA, but they were still the LA Rams. They were still in the area. But again, it didn't affect me. And those years when they moved to Anaheim, those were the Vince Ferragamo years. So, and I remember that one year that Vince Ferragamo had a wonderful year. The Rams played really well. I remember them trouncing the Cowboys on Monday night. And then, of course, we played the Cowboys again during the playoffs, and tables were reversed, and we ended up losing, getting trounced in the playoffs. But, the Anaheim years were also, like I said, it did make a difference to me.
Yeah, what the mistake Georgia made moving to Anaheim was, in my opinion, was it opened the door for the Raiders to cement a fan base in LA, sort of like what the same mistake I think Spanos made moving the Chargers to LA. It opened up San Diego County to the Rams market quite a bit in San Diego, and they're allowed to now, and it's kind of like a open territory, so to speak. I don't know if it's working. I don't know if he's growing a fan base in San Diego. He's probably growing a fan base everywhere just based on the type of players they're drafting and the product they're putting on the field as much as anything. Guys like Puka.
That's usually what it comes down to, right? The team and how well the team is doing, and, bringing it all the way to today, the number of the years between the Greatest Show on Turf and McVay, were probably the darkest years the Rams have had, and yet not only did I stick with them, my son became a big fan, and the two of us, him growing up here in New York, we followed the Rams every Sunday, even when they were 1-15. Under Spagnuolo, and then, of course, the Linehan years, and then finally the Fisher years, which, even though we were a little bit better, but let's face it, we were mediocre at best.
Right.
And they weren't fun to watch. I mean, the Fisher football philosophy was just not. It was the opposite of the Greatest Show on Turf. And then finally, they go ahead and hire this 30-year-old, and it's like, are we serious here? But now our motto is, if Les and McVay, we trust Les and McVay. So whenever there's a moment where, did we draft the right guy? Did we, F those picks? Well, I trust Les. If Les feels that, this is our moment, we have a chance to overcome and get the trophy, let's go for it.
It's sometimes I have to really bite my tongue. Here I am sitting in my man cave here, criticizing play calling by Sean McVay. How much credibility do I have? But hey, it's fun. Guys like Ian and Paul that come on this show, they have a lot more experience in those matters, so I kind of lean on them a little bit. But it's just fun.
They're definitely tougher than you are. I mean, sometimes I appreciate their point of view, and I think you guys are great. When you do your roundtables, I love the back and forth, and I love the insight, and I love the specialization of each of you in looking at the film, and I think it's Paul's insight into players, especially during the draft days. And this was the first year listening to your podcast that I really got to fully learn about the players prior to the draft. Although sometimes I get a little frustrated because most of the players you guys talked about, didn't end up coming to the Rams. I mean,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah. It was actually thanks to Paul that I'm sitting here watching the draft, and they're in the fifth round. I go like, oh, I know that guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
And this year was the first time I did that. I actually watched the
yeah,
draft. Of
yeah,
course, the Rams didn't have a first-round pick, so there was no reason to watch the draft over the last few years.
right.
But they right now, I think, yeah, except for that 1 year, and a lot of that had to do with injuries. A lot of that had to do with the fact that we went into the year, and I think it was Ian that mentioned it, or the roundtable mentioned it. We went in there being very thin when it came to our bench, in some of the position players, and especially when it came to our offensive line. So once, we got two or three of them going down, and then of course, losing Stafford,
Yeah.
that put an end to the season. But we still had our moments even that year. Obviously that Thursday night game when
Is it the Baker Mayfield game?
Baker Mayfield game. I mean,
Right.
let's face it, that was the game of the season.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
And to think that he came out of nowhere and landed on Monday and was playing on Thursday, and we beat the Raiders. And yeah, listen, I've been able, with my son, we used to go to a few of the Ram games when they were in St. Louis. The first game I took him to, and it was the very first game, as I mentioned earlier. It was Halloween, I think it was 2005. It was the year that Mike Martz got sick and had to take a leave. That team it was like right at the very end of the greatest show on turf.
Like Mark Bulger, probably the quarterback at that point.
I think Mark Bulger was still quarterbacking, but I don't think he was playing in that game that we went to. It was Halloween of, I think it was 2005, 2006, and the Rams were playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they were good that year. The Jags were good, and the Rams were not. There were a lot of injuries, and Mike Martz wasn't the coach anymore, and somehow the Rams pulled it off and won that game. And my son and I were in paradise because we had gone all the way to St. Louis specifically to watch that game. And while we were in St. Louis, the whole time I was there for that weekend, I think we got there on Saturday, watched the game on Sunday, and then took off back to New York after the game was over. The whole time I was in St. Louis, I was like, please let the Rams win. And praying the whole time I was there for my son's sake more than anything, hoping that the Rams would win. And the Rams won. So it was a good moment.
I'm thinking that was that the Jags team with like David Gerard and Maurice Jones-Drew, maybe.
Yes, and they were like, I think when they got to St. Louis, they were like 7-2. It was around Halloween, so maybe not that far into the season, but they were really good. I think they made the playoffs that year, and they were huge too. I mean, the whole offensive and defensive lines were big, and somehow the Rams were able to keep up, and they stayed close enough to then pull off the win at the end.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I don't have it in front of me, but there was a year where the Jags were really good, and I think they got to the AFC Championship game, and something went really sideways on them at the end of a game, if I remember correctly, where they just kind of blew it at the end. Something happened.
It might have been that year, Mark.
Yeah.
It's like I said, it in my mind, it was somewhat of a miracle that the Rams won, and of course you make it about yourself, right? The Rams did it for me. And for
there were times in that period and those dog years where it was a miracle if they converted a 3rd and 9.
It was incredible, and yet despite it all, Again, it all goes down to once they get into your system, right? And I think that applies to all of your teams, right? If you're a Dodger fan, I'm a Mets fan. No matter how much the Mets break my heart, I'm a fan, right? So,
Yeah, right.
and I put the Rams right there at the same level, if not, even higher level, because the Rams have given. My son says that thank God for the Rams because
Yeah.
the poor kid, he's a Met fan, he's a Knicks fan,
Oh, jeez.
he's a Rangers fan.
He's just in the wrong decade.
He's in the true, and thank God he's a Rams fan.
Yeah, I mean, he knows about Willis Reed and
No,
who was that? Who was
well,
the guard they had
the Knicks. Well, my son
in the early '70s? They were facing off with the Lakers a lot, and right.
They had Walt Frazier, they had
Walt Frazier. That's who I was thinking of.
Willis Reed, they had DeBusschere, they had Bradley.
Right.
Those teams were pretty good.
And Bradley went on to be. Didn't Bradley go on to be a U.S. senator?
Yes, of New Jersey.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, he was. I think he was a Rhodes Scholar. He was a pretty bright.
Yeah.
Guy. He is. He's still alive. A pretty bright guy. But the poor kid. He was born in '93, so he doesn't remember any of those. Even with the Mets, he had his heart broken a few times. Of course, 2000 against the Yankees, which was not good. I don't think the Dodgers have ever played the Angels in the World Series. Or imagine losing to the Angels in the World Series.
You must have been. Was that the Mets a few years ago where Chase Utley took out your shortstop?
Yes, that was 2015. The Mets ended up winning that series against the Dodgers, and then went on to the World Series. But then
didn't have their shortstop.
Well, I don't think that was the reason why we lost that series against the Royals. The Royals were just a better team.
So how do you feel about? I'd like to wrap things up with my my 5 or 6 questions, or whatever it is I have. But I also wanted to ask you, how do you feel about the Rams going into this 2024 season?
I'm very optimistic. I think going into last year, I was on the other side of optimism because obviously they pretty much gave away the Super Bowl team. They just kept a few of the key players, but most of the players were gone. And the draft, we didn't have a draft last year, or at least we didn't think we had a draft last year. Who would have known, right? That, Puka and some of the other players,
Kobe Turner, Byron Young,
the conductor, Byron Young. I mean, who would have thunk that these guys were going to be as good as they were? So going into last year, I was very pessimistic. And then, of course, at 3-6, I'm like, I think this is pretty much what we expected. And then something, kind of clicked, whether it was the bye or whatever Sean, put together, whatever they did, something clicked. And then the ride for the rest of the season. And I think it's Paul who keeps barking, going back to the Detroit game. I thought for sure getting to the that last drive, I'm like, oh my God, Stafford is going to break these people's hearts. I mean, this is going to be like mass suicide in Detroit, because I thought for sure that they were going to drive down and get that winning field goal. And I think not having a kicker really definitely hurt the Rams a lot last year. But getting back to your question, after last year, I know we don't have our AD anymore. I appreciate him. I will always appreciate him. I have a photo of his tackle of Burrow at the end of the Super Bowl. He is a superhero. I mean, for my son, Marshall Faulk was his first superhero, and AD followed right afterwards. Not having AD hurts, but I think they've done a nice job with the draft, and I think the philosophy. It's not going to be one player. It's going to be the whole unit that's going to have to make up for not having AD on the field. I think, if the offense, I think getting Jonah Jackson, hopefully he's healthy and he comes back in one piece. I think, approaching the offense like they did the last 8 games of last year. I mean, the only game we lost was against the Ravens, and we had no business losing that game.
Yeah, had them in overtime.
We should have won that game. And so they would have gone into the Detroit game literally running the table. So I really feel that if they stay healthy and they stick to their philosophy, which I know McVay is committed to it, and I'm not a big X and O guy, but listening to you guys, I understand, the different philosophy of run blocking and getting these runners to hit the hole differently, and all of that minutia, which again I don't fully understand, but whatever it is, it was working. So if they continue with that, and Puka has anything close to what he did last year, and Cooper Kupp, who I love, like I tell my son, he's my adopted kid is Coop. I love him dearly. Hopefully he'll be 100% this year. I mean, I really like the other guy that they have, Robinson, as the third wide receiver, and the kid that you love as well. I saw him last week, in the preseason game.
Yeah, Whittington. I'm kind of on the same page as you. I think this offense is going to be really, really good. And I think the defense, people are selling it short. They have some young players that can get after the quarterback. And this secondary could be actually pretty darn good, really deep. So they just have to, get off to a good start. I think this culture that they've built there, the players they draft, how much you love Cooper Kupp, and they're just adding more guys like that. Blake Corum, Jordan Whittington, Puka, guys that, you can really root for, just a really healthy clubhouse. And that's long term, that's really promising. The Rams, I don't think the Rams that I know of have a single guy that you'd characterize as a knucklehead on this team. Not that I know of, just a lot of stand-up guys that are all about the team.
Look, let's face it, if they're a knucklehead, they're not on the team anymore.
Yeah, right.
I think one of the things that we learned, especially last year, I found last year to be the year where Sean McVay really took a step forward as, I tell my son he became an adult, because up until then he would let things go maybe, but last year, if you didn't follow the rules, or if you didn't follow their philosophy, and let's face it, they changed their philosophy as the season went by.
Yeah.
And if you didn't go with the flow, you were gone. The next day, you were out of there. Cam Akers, the wide receiver, Van
Jefferson. Yeah.
He didn't tolerate somebody that wasn't on the same page.
Right.
And I really, listening to other podcasts as well about the Rams, they talk about how you either you have the ability to say no, you have the ability to say yes, you have the ability to speak your mind. But once you do that, and once you leave the room, now we're all part of the same team. And I like that. And I think I agree with you. The culture is there for them to succeed this year and in subsequent years, for sure.
So let's get to my 6 questions. And by the way, for you, if you folks haven't listened to one of these, John is my 5th person to join me on this Ram Fan Rap session. And I invite you to email me if you'd like to come on the show and do the same. We had Ernesto Salgado. He's another doctor too, by the way, from Mexico. He's the one that got this all started. It was actually his idea.
I heard his interview. It was fun.
Yeah, he said just have Ram fans on and just talk Rams football. Then we had John Perry from Washington, David Roulard from South Carolina, Rich Schultz from Pennsylvania. Now you from New York. I got another gentleman lined up from Connecticut, trying to hit all those states. I got to get someone from Missouri on. That would be a really interesting discussion. Hopefully, 100% friendly. No St. Louis, LA rivalry thing going on. But so let's get into our 6 questions. I asked the same 6 questions of every Ram fan. I think you already answered one of them, but this one you haven't. How many Ram games have you been to?
Let me see. Well, including Rams games played here in New York.
Yeah, anywhere.
All right, so I've been to 3 Ram games here in New York, and I've decided not to go anymore because I just don't like being in somebody else's stadium, even though it's in New York. I've been to 3 here, and I've been to 2 in St. Louis, and I've been to 3 in LA.
Oh, nice. In LA, Anaheim, in the Coliseum or SoFi? Have you been to SoFi yet?
No, I went to 2 in the Coliseum. I went to the famous Thursday game against the Vikings when Goff went crazy, and I think I sent you a picture of me and a Ram fan.
Right. That's right.
There.
You did.
And that was the game that Goff had a perfect score. I mean, that was like the best game that I've seen Goff play. I went to another game, big mistake on my part. My son and my daughter-in-law, we went to a Ram 49er game the following year, and that was bad. The 49ers completely destroyed us, and it was mostly like, here I was, trying to avoid going to a game in New York, and now I'm in LA, and there were more 49er fans than there were Ram fans, so that wasn't good. And then the best game we've gone to, I refer to it as the COVID game, a game against Seattle that was played on Tuesday.
Right. I remember that.
That was the year of the Super Bowl. Yeah, the year that we went to the Super Bowl, and we went there because the previous year I turned 60, and we didn't do anything. We were locked down here in the apartment. So we decided the following year for my birthday we would go and watch a Ram game, and we went to that game. And it was supposed to be Sunday, but it ended up being Tuesday. We had to extend our stay in LA, and we watched them beat Seattle. And that was the last game that I've gone to. And my son and I would love to go to one game a year in LA. My son does a lot of work with people in LA. He's a movie producer, but he lives here. He lives here in New York. And works for a production company here in New York, and he does a lot of work with people out in LA. So we hope to get out there once a year, but it's not easy. You can imagine.
The Seattle game was they were still in the Coliseum at that time?
No, they were in SoFi.
They were. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've seen a game in SoFi. I did work. As a doctor, I did some work in LA. For a couple of hospitals out there. So while I was out there one day, I decided, I've got the whole afternoon. I actually went to SoFi. It was just before preseason, and they gave me a tour of the whole stadium. It was an incredible tour. I mean, I was like just absolutely mesmerized by what I saw, and I realized, oh my God, this is like going to be amazing. And it has been. We took the tour, the $35 tour. There's like 6 of us. Yeah, and my son was kicking field goals. We were throwing touchdown passes in the end zone, and they just let us have the field for as long as we wanted. Once the tour was over, it was really nice. When you go through the
tunnel,
obviously you're in the locker rooms. The Chargers as well as the Rams, and I was in the Rams locker room. Then we went through the tunnel. I mean, it was just magical.
I remember when we went on recommended. Oh yeah, it was awesome. Free parking, and it was just really I thought it was going to be maybe a little bit of a sales pitch, but it wasn't at all for season tickets or something. It was just like, hey, let's go have a good time. And I
Well,
remember,
they did sit us down at the 50-yard line. Phenomenal seats, and of course people were asking, well, how much do these seats cost? It's like, oh,
yeah,
and they,
you don't want to,
yeah,
if you don't know, you
wanna
can't
know.
afford it. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a funny story. I was never, I wouldn't say I was a great athlete, but I could kick a ball, I could throw a ball, I could catch a ball. And we were up in the one of the suites looking down at some people that were ahead of us on the tour kicking field goals, and they were like horrible. And my son and I looked at each other and like kind of rolled our eyes. And then it was our turn. And I swear, man, I cannot kick a football anymore. I barely got it 2 feet off the ground. And my son, though, he was actually he was a soccer player, played
That
goalie,
helps.
and yeah, and he was a left footer. He I think he hit from outside 30 yards, if I remember correctly.
Nice. The Rams
Yeah,
could have
yeah.
used them last year.
I know, I know. I was telling him to send the film. Send him the film. So let's see, what else do I have for you? So who's your second question? Who's your favorite Ram player of all time?
Oh God, like there's so many for each of the various eras, but I have to say, obviously, I mentioned Vince Ferragamo, but I have to say Kurt Warner. I mean, not only as a player, but as a human being, and also his story is second to none. And he has done so much. And I know it was unfortunate that he didn't continue his career as a Ram. He had that stint with the Cardinals, but he will always be the greatest show on turf. I know there were other players there that were as important, if not more important, but Kurt really represents everything that team was. And
Yeah, I don't know if you.
my wife, for example, had absolutely nothing. She was Italian, had nothing to do with football, but she would watch just because of Kurt Warner.
Yeah,
Loved Kurt.
I think my wife's hoping Jimmy G gets more FaceTime actually, but
I wonder why.
yeah,
Um,
the
but there we
yeah
go.
the
We got another Italian
yeah,
American.
there you go. Yeah, I forgot about him. Yeah, the thing about Kurt Warner is, he is clearly, obviously, no doubt about it, 100% a genuinely good person. That if you saw him on the street, he would he'd just be super awesome, I think.
I mean,
And
his story is so good. It's just a great story.
yeah,
Not
and
just
when
the
I
football part of it.
yeah, and I don't know if you caught my Mount Rushmore segment, and
Yes.
I tried to narrow it down to players from different eras, players from different positions, and I settled on Kurt Warner as one of the guys on my Rams Mount Rushmore, because the way I thought about it was, is if you were to go up to some dude in South Dakota or some lady in Florida and you said, name a Ram for me, name someone that played for the Rams, and a lot of them would come up with Kurt Warner before they came up with anybody else.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it had to do with his story more than
Right?
what he did on the football field. His story, obviously, the movie didn't hurt. And you're going to love this, Mark. For the longest time, my favorite movie was Heaven Can Wait, because that
Oh
was
yeah,
the only time
Ryan
the Rams
O'Neal.
won a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I actually have that little. There's a little clip of that movie that I have saved where Ryan O'Neal is running towards a reporter, I think, and the reporter asks him for a comment, and he says the Rams are winning the Super Bowl or something to that effect.
It was,
It's in the movie.
yeah,
Pardon?
it was Warren Beatty though.
Warren Beatty. I'm sorry, Warren
So
Beatty, Ryan O'Neal. They're kind of the same guy, aren't
they
they?
look alike.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, there's I think getting back to Kurt, and also if you look at what he did on the field, I mean, 2 MVPs, a Super Bowl MVP. If the Patriots don't cheat, it would have been another Super Bowl MVP because he would have won the MVP if the Rams somehow won that game. And then even the game that he would have won another Super Bowl MVP with the Cardinals if somehow the Steelers don't come back and win that game. I mean, Kurt did, and he's a Hall of Famer.
Right.
And a Hall of Famer playing probably the shortest period of time.
Right.
He wasn't a guy who collected stats. He played quality football every year.
Yeah.
Even when he played here in New York.
Yeah. The Giants. Yeah.
With the Giants. I mean, and if the Giants don't bench him because they wanted to get Eli some playing time in his rookie year, the Giants make the playoffs that year. Thanks to Kurt. So Kurt is definitely, but I think you said it when you were doing that episode on Mount Rushmore. There's so many. Going back, I mean, the great defenses, the Merlin Olsons, the Deacon Jones, and I mean, there's just so many.
I think of the 5 people. I think the 5 I've asked, I have to go. I'm gonna have to start keeping score. I think 3 of them have answered Kurt Warner. I think someone answered Deacon Jones, and I have to go back and I got to take a tally on that. And I should ask these questions at the same time. I should ask these questions together. Last time I did, who your favorite Ram is, and who the greatest Ram of all time is, and as well as who is the most underappreciated. And maybe you already answered who the greatest Ram of all time is. Same answer, Kurt Warner?
Again, a tough question because there were so many. Obviously, AD has to be considered as well because of what he has done and what he has meant to the Rams these last few years. And everyone looks at that last tackle of Burrow in that Super Bowl, but the tackle before, the play before, where he stops that running back on a 3rd and 1 was an incredible play. And what he did in the NFC Championship game in getting Jimmy G to throw the interception. So AD has to be up there as well. I'm torn, but I think AD is just too fresh. It's too early. He's still, when I think of the greatest, Ram, or I think of players that have played already. And yes, I think Kurt would still be up there. And of course, Marshall Faulk. I know you talk a lot about Steven Jackson. If it wasn't for Steven Jackson, we would have stopped watching the Rams for that 5-year period of time. I mean, that was the only reason why we watched on Sunday, was to see what Steven Jackson would pull off. So there were so many great players, but I would say Kurt definitely is up there as my favorite and the greatest.
That's solid. And who do you think's the most underappreciated Ram?
I'd like to go back to the 70s and talk about some of the players that played that really made a difference back then. And I think the Jack Youngbloods and the Freddie Dryers of the world stick in my mind. I mean, to play the Super Bowl with a broken tibia. I mean, we're not even talking fibula here. And to do as well as he did. I mean, the Rams, I remember watching that Super Bowl.
No, that was the NFC Championship game?
Well, that's where he fractured the leg, and then he continued.
Oh, and then he played against the Steelers in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Right.
And I remember watching that game, and I was like, obviously, like most fans, forget about Rams fans, shocked that the Rams were going into the 4th quarter with a lead. And I thought for sure that they were going to be able to find a way to win. And especially given the fact that their wide receiver, Swan, was knocked out of the game. We just had to cover one guy, and unfortunately we weren't able to.
Right.
That was
one big play. Yeah.
That was a great Steeler team. But Youngblood is definitely another player that I don't think he's underappreciated, but we don't mention him as often. And of course, he wasn't part of the fearsome foursome. So,
a lot of people, a lot of even Ram fans get that wrong. They assume that he was, but he came a little bit later. And you ever see a picture? There's 2 Rams that I think if you find a picture, and I have a picture of the one guy, not Jack Youngblood. in their uniform, standing on the field with their hands on their hips, that are the epitome of a football player. It would be Jack Youngblood and Tom Mack, two guys that
He's great.
just, man, warriors, man, warriors.
Hey,
Yes,
we forget all of the other, like the Orlando Paces of the world,
Jackie
and
Slater.
Jackie Slater. I mean,
Yeah,
those. I mean, and it, again, the Rams were based on a good, solid running game.
yeah,
Without those guys up front, that whole scheme would have been shot
yeah.
to us. So, there's so many, and again, we've been blessed. We've been blessed as fans to have these. And you know what, my son and I always agree that we'd rather have those down times, as long as when we have the up times, we get to win a championship every once in a while.
Yeah.
I'm
I
okay
think
with having the down years.
yeah, you got to take the good with the bad. And I think, like Patriots fans had it good for so long. It's going to be interesting to see, how many Patriots jerseys I see around Southern California over the next few years, because assuming they still struggle, maybe they'll bounce back. But I wear my Ram colors pretty consistently during that period. I don't wear jerseys to work every day or anything like that, but I got a shirt I'll put on game day, or bouncing around town. If they're 0-16, I'm still wearing it.
Good for you.
So you already answered this question. Who is your second team? Any sport, college, pro? And
I have to say it's the Mets. The New York
right,
Mets. They and as much as I love the Rams, as you could tell from this hour-long talk that we've had, I always tell people that baseball was my first love.
yeah, me too. Me too.
And a lot of it had to do with the relationship I had with my dad. My dad was an immigrant. He came here to the United States from Italy. He never really fully embraced football. He found it to be too violent. And in fact, he used to call it beast ball. He just didn't like it. And he was always fearful that I somehow would want to play it, and thinking that I would get injured or something. So he was always fearful, and never really fully embraced it. But with baseball, he really loved. He learned the game. We learned it together. We learned it together at the same time in 1969. And if you recall,
Miracle Mets.
Exactly. The last miracle the good Lord made was the 69 Mets. And, it was a fun time to learn baseball with your dad. And the two of us became really tight Met fans. And, until the day he died.
I can name two players from that team, and probably more. Tommy Agee.
Yes.
Tom Seaver.
Can't forget Tom, but Tommy Agee is a good one.
Yeah, well, I grew up with baseball too, Southern California. You ever see the movie The Sandlot?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, that was kind of similar to how we grew up in my neighborhood. We weren't as organized as those guys, but we'd play baseball all summer long. And it was pretty common, and it was true of myself. I think there was a day where I could tell you every starting player in the National League.
I believe it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us could. It was just what we did. American League was a different thing. There was a real separation between the two leagues back then, for better or worse. But
not anymore.
Yeah, right. But who is there? I seem to always float to the Cubs for some reason. I think I could name all the Cubs, but the Mets, the Miracle Mets. That's all that's coming to me right now. They had a really good pitching staff.
Yes, they had Seaver, Kuzman. Believe it or not,
Jerry Kuzman.
Believe it or not, Nolan Ryan was a reliever.
Right. Yeah.
He was a reliever. The Mets front office never fully were able to get Ryan to be comfortable with New York. I mean, he was a Texas guy. So when they traded him to the Angels, because he went to the Angels for Jim Fregosi. So, and obviously the rest is history when it comes to running. But they had Ryan, they had Kuzman, they had
Bud Harrelson. Was it Bud Harrelson?
Buddy was the shortstop.
Right.
They had Jerry Grody was the catcher behind the plate, a very good defensive catcher. had a lot of clutch hits during that season. And then they had this guy that they picked up from the Pirates halfway through '69, Don Clendenin, who played
Oh, right.
he played first base and platooned with Ed Kranepool, who was an original Met and was with the team his whole career. He's still alive, and everybody loves Eddie Kranepool. And they had Cleon Jones. I don't know if you remember Cleon.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Is he the center fielder?
He was the left fielder.
Left
and
fielder.
He was their best hitter.
Yeah.
Cleon was that year
you could
340.
You could almost make a correlation between the '69 Mets and the '99 Rams as far as coming out of nowhere, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that was it. That to me, when the '99 Rams were having their season, I was watching them and I was saying, hey, the Mets did it. I got a good feeling about the Rams doing it. Although they had a couple of moments, I'll never forget watching the NFC Championship game. I was by myself. I didn't want anybody in the room with me, watching the Rams and Tampa Bay, and that was such a painful game to watch.
Well, I think the Titans and the Bucks both, because the Rams played the Titans earlier that season.
Yes,
and their strategy was smash mouth, physical, in your face, and that's how the Bucks played too.
That was
very physical,
and that was a really good defense the Bucks had. I think they got the breaks, a lot of the turnovers, but then when Ricky Prohl caught that ball and he was holding it like a loaf of bread, the ball was about to squirm out of his hands, and when he caught that ball, it was such a relief. Because I really thought that if there was a game they were going to lose, that was going to be it. Because
and you know who one of their safeties was, right? So John Lynch was one of their safeties in that game. Yeah.
Yes. And they had Warren Sapp. I mean, that defense was second to none.
Yeah, it was nasty. Yeah,
it was a nasty defense. And by the way, Mark, I don't know if you know, I was looking up I was thinking about that game against the Vikings back in '69, and I was reading about it, the playoff game, and I realized that, did you know that Dick Vermeil was the special teams coach for the Rams back in '69?
I probably knew it and forgot it, like a lot of other things at this point. I learned it again today. No, I forgot.
I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize that. Yeah, I didn't know that he was connected with the Rams prior to him coming. I mean, I remember his days in Philadelphia, but yeah.
Okay,
go ahead, Mike.
I was going to throw my last question at you if you're ready.
Yes.
And what is your? And I think you may have answered this already. Maybe you didn't realize you were answering it, but I think I know the answer. What is your favorite Ram moment on TV, big time game winning moment, or an experience you had at a game? That one moment that always jumps to the forefront when you start thinking about the Rams.
So many, thank God, so many moments that are special. But I have to say that the bomb to Bruce
in the Super Bowl, right?
In the Super Bowl, it was so exhilarating. And I know during an interview, Isaac Bruce said that he almost fainted as he ran through the end zone. And just the feel of everybody going crazy and him realizing he had just scored I almost fainted. That's because
that was one of those games where we had it in the bag and then it's slipping away.
Yes.
And then that play followed by, I thought you were going to say the tackle, but the Isaac Bruce catch is probably a little bit more exhilarating. Is the right word.
The tackle again was more of a relief. It was like, oh my God, I can't believe after all of this, we're going to lose this game. So when he, McNair was doing, I mean, we couldn't stop him. I mean, we couldn't get him. We couldn't bring him down.
Right.
So when Mike Jones made the tackle, it was more of a relief. Like, oh my God, thank God he made the tackle. But as far as an exhilarating moment, that bomb to Bruce was
Yeah. And
second to.
I think the play against Tampa Bay again. Boy, Tampa Bay must hate us. The play the Cooper Cup catch after the Bucks
Oh,
had come back, and we're
Mark,
like,
that was
how could
amazing.
we're going to lose this? How could we possibly lose this? It had a lot to do with Cam Akers, unfortunately, and then that throw to Stafford to Cup, that was incredible.
And at that moment, my son and I were watching that game together, and I said to him, I said, obviously we were both convinced we're going to overtime. I can't believe we're going to overtime.
Right?
He's probably going to knee it. He's going to knee it, and the next
Yeah.
thing you know, he goes back, and oh my God, he was wide open. How the hell did that
Yeah.
happen?
And against Tom Brady too, that would have made it extra painful. Not to that
It
guy.
was absolutely, that was an exhilarating moment.
Yeah.
No doubt goes up there in the list of exhilarating moments as a Rams fan. But the importance of the Bruce catch
Oh yeah.
in the
Yeah.
Super Bowl and being so late in the game.
Yeah.
Of course, obviously the Cooper Cup catch against
Yeah.
the Bucks
There's
was.
a lot of catches. The Ricky Pearl
I
catch,
was going to say
that
the
you
Ricky
already mentioned.
Pearl.
And even the Cup catch against the 49ers, which is one of the few times we've seen an emotional Cooper Cup. Yeah, there have been a lot of big ones. And, a little interesting tidbit. I'm going to get the data wrong here slightly, and I've talked about this a couple of times. Isaac Bruce, 73-yard game-winning catch in the Super Bowl. In the 1950s, it was it Tom Fears or we're crazy? It was Tom Fears, I think. 73-yard catch to win the NFL championship. Man, I'm probably getting it wrong. It was either Hirsch or Fears, one of them. 73
What a
yards, very
coincidence.
similar. Yeah, I know. And I made the joke that the last place you want to be is against the Rams late in the Super Bowl, and they have the ball at their own 27-yard line. Watch out, here it's coming.
If we only had that opportunity against the Patriots back in 2001.
No,
I
yeah.
still think that team overall had as good of a season, if not better, than the Super Bowl team
Oh yeah,
2
yeah.
years prior. That was a good team too, very very good team.
Hey, John, this has been a really fun discussion. We even got into the New York Mets. Who would have thought? But that's good. Maybe we got some Mets fans tuning in.
You got my two loves.
Yeah, yeah, and so I guess that means probably shouldn't go there. Are you a Dodger hater? And it's okay if you are.
Mark, I have to say I'm not, because I was born and raised in Brooklyn.
Yeah,
A lot of the older kids, because the Dodgers left a few years before I was born, but a lot of the older kids in my neighborhood still held on to the Dodgers, and
yeah,
they weren't watching baseball until 1969.
yeah.
Because they didn't want to be Yankee fans, and the Mets were
Right.
so bad. So there was still a lot of Dodger nostalgia growing up, and I still have Brooklyn Dodger nostalgia, even not ever having seen them. So
Right.
I can't say that I'm a Dodger hater, although obviously when the Mets are playing the Dodgers,
Yeah.
I'm not rooting for the
Yeah,
Dodgers.
and I get it. I grew up a Dodger fan. They were my number one team probably for the first, 15, 18 years of my life, but I could completely understand other baseball fans, every other baseball fan outside of Los Angeles not liking the Dodgers, because they're just one of those teams, that is probably easy to hate. I get it.
And then this year, obviously there were a lot of fans here in New York, including the Yankee fans, that, were not happy with the Dodgers kind of gobbling up all of the Japanese players.
Right.
Okay, you want
Man.
to get Ohtani, that's great, but Yamamoto too? I mean, come on, now you're exaggerating.
Yeah, they really need to, are getting really off topic here, but the way the NFL structures it with the salary cap is really, really works well. And Major League Baseball, I don't even know how it works, but I know that you can spend as much money as you want, and then you got to pay like a luxury tax.
Yes.
But that still means that some teams are going to have a big leg up on the competition if they have the cash. I'm not going to pretend like I really know what I'm talking about, but hopefully that's
No,
kind of accurate.
but you're absolutely right. I mean,
Yeah.
football is as good as it is because every team in every market has a chance to win the Super Bowl.
Right. Yeah.
That's not the case in baseball.
Right. Exactly. Okay, John, man, it's been
Mark, it was great.
fun.
I really
Yeah.
enjoyed.
Yeah. Well,
Going back, like reliving my youth.
yeah. And if you decide to come out to LA, let me know and maybe I'll have you on before or after the game you go to.
And let me just one last thing. Now that I mean we aren't. You see that helmet?
Yeah.
Those were the colors that made me fall in love with the Rams.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with the helmet too, but especially the colors. Yeah, I
And
know.
although obviously now they've been wearing these colors more than those
Yeah.
colors. Every time I see them, and that I think it was 2017 when they wore that helmet, and 2018 they wore that helmet with the old the old St. Louis Rams uniforms, which was so
Right.
disappointed. But watching
Right.
them wear that helmet still gave me the goosebumps.
Yeah, I have a picture here behind me of the fearsome foursome in the blue and white, and there's just something about it.
It really
It's the
is.
best. Yeah.
It really is. All right, Mark.
Okay, John, thanks a lot for your time. Really
Thank
appreciate it.
you. Really
Okay,
appreciate it. Bye bye.
out here.